Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Global Conversations. My name is Nick D'Agostino.
And I'm Amanda Coletta. Today on Around the World in 10 Minutes, we examine social media in North Korea, followed by a look at how the Eurozone crisis is affecting Italy's historical sites.
Later in the podcast, we bring you a discussion with Master of Global Affairs student Kaylee Jordan on gender in Africa, followed by an interview with Tony DeMello on gender in the workplace. But first, we turn to social media in North Korea. We live in some pretty interesting times, where technology has the ability to bring people together. Yet some governments don't really want that. North Korea is one such country. With effectively zero internet access allowed to its citizens, and one of the most repressive states in the world, North Korea is an enigma in a digital globe. It's a black patch, where traditional news agencies and governments have failed to pull the veil from North Korea. Social media and new forms of journalism are succeeding. Using only his iPhone, an Associate Press photographer living in Pyongyang has been using social media to bring the world of North Korea to our screens. David Guttenfelder is a world-renowned photographer. A 7-time World Press Award winner, he's covered stories including the Rwandan genocide, wars in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and Iraq. He first went to North Korea in 2000. Forced to give up his phone at customs, Guttenfelder had little connection to the outside world from this elusive state. Slowly but surely, though, the country has developed a cell network. Launched in 2008, North Korea's 3G network now boasts an impressive 2 million subscribers. The catch? No internet connectivity to its citizens. Groups like Reporters Without Borders and the OpenNet initiative describe the country as having the world's worst black hole. Not only is internet access pretty much completely forbidden to most citizens, it's a heavily censored and filtered experience. But now, expats and long-term visitors do have internet. David Guttenfelder is now posting phenomenal photos of daily life in North Korea onto Instagram. So, while sometimes new media forms are criticized for being trivial and non-productive, their application in new contexts are showing success where traditional approaches of media and journalism have failed.
Moving from new forms of social expression to old ones, ever daydreamed about possessing the keys to a medieval castle perched high above the Italian countryside, or a 15th century palace adorned with Renaissance frescoes? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, I come bearing good news. You may be in luck. In an effort to hack away at the country's 1.9 trillion euro debt, the cash-strapped Italian government has decided it will sell off a large number of its historical sites. Fabrizio Saccomanni, who, as the Italian Minister for the Economy, has one of the least desirable jobs in the world, estimates that the sale of these properties could rake in almost 510 million euro, which would go a very long way toward balancing the peninsula's books. Politicians at Montecitorio hope that the Bel Paese's treasures will be purchased by private businesses and transformed into restaurants, museums, and hotels, generating not only thousands of new jobs, but also attracting international investment. Easier said than done. Over the past decade, Italy has had the slowest growing economy in the Eurozone, and life for many Italians has been anything but dolce. Coupled with the fact that, like death and taxes, revolving door governments and political instability in Italy seem to be one of life's eternal verities, the last thing the country needs is to face the wrath of Brussels. This is, of course, not the first time the boot has sold off its properties. Last year, a slew of lighthouses on the spectacular island of Sardinia were sold off to private businesses and converted into hotels and museums. This bonfire of European antiquities is not exclusive to Italy either. Last year, across the Ionian Sea, Greece also sold off some of its idyllic islands to foreign buyers in an attempt to stay afloat. It reminds me of something my Renaissance history professor once told my classmates and I as we stood sweaty and sunburnt on the Palatine Hill overlooking the Roman Forum. 60% of the world's cultural heritage is in Italy, and the rest is safe. Next, we bring you an interview by Ali McHugh with Master of Global Affairs student Kaylee Jordan discussing gender in Africa.
Kaylee Jordan is a first-year MGA student, and she spent the last summer in Uganda working on an educational program that developed into a program about gender. So, Kaylee, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
So can you tell us how the program got started in Uganda?
Yeah, for sure. So I went to Uganda to originally work with a primary school and orphanage to strengthen their education programs. But we got there, and it turned out that the project wasn't really going to go forward because they didn't actually need us. So the team and I were kind of at a loss of what to do, and we started talking with people in the community who mentioned that a couple months previously there had been a volunteer in the area who had done some adult education, and a lot of the people, our friends and local members of the community, were talking about how it would be really cool if that could happen again. We started out teaching adult education, and it really turned into more of a community hub for the different women in the area, because they were the ones really interested in education and really wanted to learn and to learn English, and they were the ones coming every day, and it became more of a community space to talk about the different issues that they were facing in their village.
Why do you think it was predominantly women who were able to come to your classes?
The main reason, or that a lot of the women were saying themselves, was they were seeing their children go to school, and they were seeing their children come home, and they were seeing their children talk to their friends in English, and they weren't able to communicate with them in English, so they really wanted to be able to communicate that better.
So did you have any men in the class, or was?
I think there was maybe 3 men out of 25 women.
Was there any tension between the different genders of your students, or was everything kind of fine with the classes that you were teaching?
I mean, in general, everything mostly was great. There was one class where we were teaching a story about, it was written by a Ugandan woman, and she was writing a story about a girl getting education in Kampala. And so this one class, I got everyone to write their little journals, and we had read a chapter about how the girl, the protagonist, had gone off to school and she was learning education, and at the end of the class, we would get people to stand up and read what they had written. And so this one man at the end of the class stood up and he started reading his journal, and he went, "I do not think that women should be educated because it means that they cannot cook and clean for their husbands." And he went off on like this 10-minute rant about how women in Uganda should not get education, which was really jarring for me because as someone from Canada, that is not something that you usually hear. However, it was really interesting to see the dynamic of the class, because it didn't turn into a confrontation. It didn't turn into like, you're wrong, we're right. But different women in the class had stood up and they read their journals, which were talking about how they believed in the power of education and how they wanted their daughters to go to school, and how they wanted to go to school, and how it could become part of a Ugandan culture, and that should be a main value.
Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience in Uganda with us.
Thank you.
Next, we bring you an interview by Seher Shafiq with Tony DeMello on gender in the workplace.
Hello everyone, today we have with us Tony DeMello, a lawyer who has worked at the UN doing humanitarian work, including at the UNHCR in Geneva. While studying at Princeton University, Tony was a Fulbright scholar, and currently she works as a consultant at Mars Discovery District. We're so lucky to have her, so thank you, Tony, so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Tony, you spoke a few weeks ago at the Munk School Career Week about gender imbalances in the workplace, and you highlighted gender imbalances in executive positions, hiring opportunities, pay, and so much more. Your main argument was that there are systemic problems that prevent women from achieving certain successes in the workplace. So could you talk about some of your own experiences and opinions about this?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's a challenge is, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to come to the Munk School, and it's that there aren't often role models at the very high levels. So the first challenge that I think a lot of women face is they come into industries and companies where they don't see a lot of people that look like them that they can emulate. And furthermore, this results in an inability to develop allies and mentors at the same rate that other people would, such as men. In terms of systemic barriers, I think just realistically, if you look at the numbers, there are estimates from the Pay Equity Commission of Ontario that we're making, on average, 27% less than men for equal work. So it's not overall, but for equal jobs, there's a great differential in pay. I was working on the Equal Pay campaign this year, and one of the things that was really persuasive for me was that at the end of a career, a woman and a man who retire, who have earned the same amount at the end of their career, the woman has effectively worked for 13 years without pay. More than that, I think a lot of what I've been seeing sort of in the legal career and in the consulting careers is that women come in at sometimes equal numbers, so 50%, usually 30 to 40%, but even if they come in at 50%, what we don't see is women rising at equal numbers. So they start to thin out. And I think a lot of reasons are given for this, and primarily childcare is the main one that's stated. But in the research that we've seen, and specifically research that was done at the University of Toronto, we've seen even women who don't have children, that start at the same position as a man who doesn't have children, see this real differential as they rise.
Can you explain what imposter syndrome is?
So imposter syndrome first came out in an article by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. But the idea is that often when we get a position or we get a scholarship opportunity, we feel like we didn't actually deserve it. So we walk into this feeling like an imposter. And so you hear these comments like fake it till you make it. But often, even once people have made it, they still feel like they're faking it, that they don't deserve to be there. And this happens in both men and women and happens across races and socioeconomic status. But what's really interesting is women react to this very differently from men. So generally, women, when they feel like they're an imposter and they didn't deserve the opportunity that they've received, will withdraw. Not always, but generally, men respond to imposter syndrome by puffing up. So by exhibiting higher levels of confidence than they actually have to compensate for that feeling of insecurity. And so the reason that becomes a problem is if we live in a society of fake it till you make it, the men come off even more confident so that they're at a higher level than they've been perceived to be. And women come off really not deserving or owning or using those opportunities to their fullest.
So unfortunately, we have run out of time, although this conversation could really continue forever and ever. So thank you so much, Tony, for joining us. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Global Conversations, produced by students in the Master of Global Affairs program at the Munk School of Global Affairs. The executive producers of Global Conversation are Michelle Park and Nathaniel Dove, and assistant producer Cassandra Cow. We'd like to thank our analyst, Ashita Guptan. Staff appearing in this episode are Amanda Coletta, Saher Shafiq, Ali McHugh, and myself, Nick D'Agostino. A special thank you to guests Tony DeMello and Kaylee Jordan. Thanks for listening.